Kodim Kol Hayom Yom Rishon HaShabbos. Today is Sunday and it is Tes Zayin. Mar Cheshvan. Tonight is already Toiv Mar Cheshvan. The Mabul starts. But after, the end of the Mabul is a good thing. So we're holding by the end of the Mabul. Okay. Now we're learning Parsha. Kedarkeinu B'Kodesh with Hashem's help on Sunday night. And the topic is Vayetze Yitzchok lasuach basodeh. Last year, we learned Pasuk Samach Beis. The Yitzchok ba mi boil be'el lachayre. So this year we're doing the next Pasuk. It's a whole nother story. We all know the story, right? It's one of the most elaborately told stories in the Chumash. Maybe the single most elaborate told story in the Chumash. It's repeated 2 or 3 times. That Avraham is looking for a wife for Yitzchok. And the story is told in incredible detail. And what's interesting about the story is Avraham is not involved in the story. Yitzchok is not involved in the story. Rivka is involved in the story. Besuel is a little bit involved in the story. Lavan is involved in the story, and Eved Avraham, the servant of Avraham, his name is never mentioned. He's only called Eved Avraham, the servant of Avraham. We know from other places that Eved Avraham is Eliezer. But it's one of those interesting little details that you overlook when you learn the Chumash, is that it's obviously by design that his name is never mentioned. He's called Eved Avraham. And of course, a couple of years back we learned another Parsha class which asks the question, why is this story so important? Why is it told in such detail? Especially, it's not about the marriage. The marriage of Yitzchok and Rivka is one pasuk. It's about the shidduch. The shidduch was on for 65 psukim. I mean, if the first lesson is a shidduch's a long story. So the Eibush, the half of it shouldn't be such a long story. A whole Parsha in the Chumash has a little beginning and a little end, and in the middle a shidduch. So of course Chassidus talks about it, and Chassidus says that the reason the story is so long is because it really is all about the shidduch. The marriage is Mashiach. The shidduch is getting there. The marriage the Eibishter does. We got to get to the chuppah. And that's why the actual marriage of Yitzchok and Rivka is Bekitzer, because it's a marriage of Yidden and the Eibishter. Yitzchok and Rivka is Hashem and Yidden. And the shidduch is the process of avodah that we do between Matan Torah, between the Avos HaElam and Mashiach Tzidkeinu, getting to where we have to go. And that's why the story is told in such detail. And emphatically, the introduction to the story is so detailed. And the conclusion of the story is so concise because it is all about the shidduch. And of course, everybody knows the story. Yitzchok is 37 years old, or 40 years old. He's not married. He almost lost his life in the Akedah. And Abraham says to himself, Hayali lasiya isha, I should have married him off. So he sends Eliezer Eved Avraham to Charan. And Eliezer has a secret plan. What's Eliezer's secret plan? Eliezer's secret plan is that Eliezer has a daughter. And he would like, Eli, says Rashi, to me. Ulai is missing a vav. Eli, which means that Eliezer is hoping that Avraham will say, okay, I'll take your daughter. But Avraham says, Ata oror, the Yitzchok baruch, the ein baruch mizdabek ba'oror. Nimrod, Eliezer, isn't that incredible? I just saw today in my preparations again, Eliezer's father. You know who Eliezer's father was? Nimrod. Could you imagine Nimrod, that the Torah says, for all of history, when you want to identify a person as a troublemaker, you're going to call him Meirid after Nimrod. His son was Eliezer of Avraham, Eliezer, the Mesek Eliezer. It's incredible. You know, this is like Rashi, like Shimshon Agibah says, from the most bitter comes from the most sweet. But he was from Chum. And therefore he has to send people to his family, to Ur Kasdim, to Choron. Over there you have Bnei Shem, Semites. Maybe they're not so righteous, but they are after all Bnei Shem, and to find a wife for Yitzchok. And of course Yitzchok ends up marrying what turns out to be a cousin, Rivka. Rivka is a generation later. Yitzchok is Avraham's son. Rivka is Nacher's granddaughter, or great-granddaughter, but they're cousins. More or less they're cousins. And the story involves how the whole thing is one big miracle start to finish. He travels to Haran in a single day. And he comes home the next day. Schön. Why does he travel to Haran in a single day? Amaisem tashtan muktam. Avraham wrote a note, which he handed to Eliezer. In this note it's written that on this and this date I give Yitzchok, my son, all of my property. Everything I own. And Avraham wants that this note should be effective only from the time that it becomes necessary, from the day of the Shidduch. So if Avraham is going to arrive 10 days late, and the date in the note is going to be 10 days early, it may bring a shaila into the credibility of the document, what's called a shtan mukman. When you have a document which has an early date, it's disqualified because of reasons of creditors and debtors. It's a long, complicated story. So because of the note that Avraham wrote, Eliezer had to arrive on the same day he left. The next morning he wakes up, and they suggest maybe you stick around for a while. I mean, Rivka was the grand old age of 3. She wasn't exactly an old lady. What's going to happen if she stays Yomim or Yosef? And of course, the end of the story is Nikru la Naira v'Nishara as Piyah. We're making a shidduch. The final say belongs to the mishudechet, to the girl. Let the Rivka make a decision, and she says, "Eilech, I'm going." And as she says, with permission or without permission, you let me, you don't let me, I'm going. And they left. And they arrive in the evening. When they arrive in the evening, Yitzchok is in southern Eretz Yisrael, apparently. What's he doing there? Says Rashi, he went to get a wife for Hagar, to bring Hagar back to Avram. Avram lost his wife 3 years before, and the Yitzchok went to bring another wife for his father, which is very interesting. Yitzchok was, even though his mother was Sarah, and Sarah had passed away, he goes and he brings his wife to Hagar. And we learned last year, Pasuk Samach Beis, Yitzchok ba mi bay be'ela chayrei. There's many different interpretations of this pasuk. And as Yitzchok is returning from bringing Hagar to Avraham, he coincidentally, he supposedly by mistake, bumps into Rivka as Rivka is en route. And of course the next pasuk, Samach Daled and Samach Hey, describe how Rivka sees this incredible personality, and she falls off her camel, she falls off her donkey, and she says to Eliezer, says to Avraham, who is that person? And he says, who Adoni? That's your chassan. Which is an interesting story. Sooner or later we'll get into that story, but of course the end of that pasuk is Vatika Chatzoy Vatiskas. She covers her face, and this is of course the source of the custom that you didn't have, that under a chuppah you cover the face of a kala. This we learned from Rivka, but that's not for this year. The topic of this class is this pasuk on page 1. Vayetze Yitzchok lasuach basada. Yitzchok goes out into the field lasuach. What does lasuach mean? Don't tell me, because whatever you'll say will be right and will be wrong. Okay? Because there's many interpretations. The simple translation means to talk. To who? Nobody knows. Basada, in the field, leifneis erev, as the sun is going down. Vayisa ein, if he raises up his eyes. Vayad, and he sees v'hine gemalim b'hem, camels are coming. Okay, and of course Rivka sees him as well, and so forth. So we're going to study one pasuk, pasuk Samach Gimel. What is the meaning of this pasuk? Vayetze Yitzchok lasuach basada. Yitzchok was out to speak in the field. Now we're going to have an interpretation that's actually going to connect this pasuk to the fact that the Rivka is on her way. But we'll get to that in Mitzvah Hashem in due time and with the mercy of the clock. But for the most part, we're really focusing on the first half of this pasuk. Yitzchok lasuach basada lifnei serev. Yitzchok was out in the field in the evening, in the field lasuach, which means the pashtus to speak. So let's not waste any time. Rashi is on the left, on the top. Lasuach, says Rashi, lashon tefillah k'mo yishpech sich. Page 1. Vayetze Yitzchok lasuach basada, to speak, which means to daven. And the Gemara says the same thing. The Yitzchok went to daven in the field. You'll see him at the Sham on the next page. That the Yitzchok was the one who was machabed filas mincha, right? And that's why he went out into the field. In the evening he was davening mincha. You know what? Let's not waste any time. Go to page 2, where I made my arrow of Vayetze Yitzchok lasuach basada. Says the Gemara Tanya. The Gemara says that the 3 others were masakin shachris mincha ma'ir. Yitzchok tiken tfilas mincha. Yitzchok enacted the prayer of mincha. Shenem, as it's written. Vayetze Yitzchok lasuach basada lifneis arav. Yitzchok went out into the field to pray towards evening, And ve'in sicha l'tfila. Sicha means to speak. And the Chazal say speaking is prayer. Sheneimah, it says in the Pasuk, tfila la'anich yatev, the prayer of the poor person. Ki yatev. Yatev means he invests himself, he gets involved. V'lifnei havaye yishpech sichei. And before God, he pours out his siach. Siach means his words. So we learn from this Pasuk in Tilim that sicha means to daven, and that's the meaning of sicha according to Rashi. Okay, now go back to page 1. Let's quickly do the Rabbeinu Hanan. Rabbeinu Hanan is on the upper right. The second thing on the upper right. Vayetze yitzal lasuach basada lefneis erev, says the Rabbeinu Hanan. Zu hasichi tfilas tzarayim. This sicha is davening mincha kedas hamesuralei me'aviv, as the tradition was given to him from his father. Okay, which means that until his father, nobody davened at all. His father davened once a day, and Yitzchok started to daven twice a day. Now we read the Rashbam. So Rashi and the Rabbeinu Hananel, as well as the Rasag and the Gemara, all say that Vayetze Yitzchok Soach Pasada means to daven, to pray. The Rasag is right here. The Rashbam is right here. It's the third from the top on the right, where I made my arrow. He says a very, very simple thing. Vayetze Yitzchok Lasuach Pasada. The word lasuach means plants. Kediksiv, like we read in Bereshis, v'chol siach hasadeh. Plants are called siach, things that grow out of the ground. And what is the meaning of Vayetze Yitzchak lasuach? Klaimer latas ilanes v'lidas gani pe'elov. He went to plant trees and to see how his agricultural farmers are working. That's all. Prayer. Who's talking about prayer? He went to check on his farms. Vayetze Yitzchak lasuach. He went out to plant trees and to see how his agriculture is coming along. Quite a stretch from davening to worrying about farming. But that's what the Rashbam says. The Cheskuni is on the right, at the very, very bottom. He said the same thing as the Rashbam. I'm going to save the Cheskuni. Now Even Ezra. Even Ezra is on the left, where I made my second arrow. In other words, the middle arrow. Okay? V'hu yotza lasuach basodeh. I'm starting in the middle. Basodeh is the third line, right here. Look here. He went out into the field. Says the Even Ezra, Kilayma litayil bein asichim. A whole nother interpretation. He didn't go to daven. He didn't go to plant trees. He went to walk around amongst the trees to take a stroll. Lifneis erev, in the evening. Why? Le'eis shapein Hashem. The sun is going down and it's getting cooler. V'hu eis erev. This is the evening. Shederach b'nei adam. It's normal for people. Latzeis, to go out. Litayil bein asichim, to wander around amongst the trees. And as one of the Mepharshim says, because it's cooler, it's not so hot. So you have three completely different interpretations. Some say, beginning with the Gemara, lasuach means to daven. Some say he wanted to get involved in agriculture. And some say he wanted to enjoy the cool breeze. Okay? And some actually say he went to Chap HaShmus, he went to hang around with people, to Chap HaShmus, and so forth. I'm sorry, we just read the Radak, not the Even Ezra, but don't matter. Okay. Now, the Ramban is on the right, over here. The Ramban is the middle of the right side. One line, I underlined it. Vayetze lifneis erev, wander the field, lasuach besada, to wander in the field, in Mereya v'eyav v'ashasham, with his friends. To hang around, to schmooze with his friends, which is very, very similar to the Even Ezra. Okay? Now there's the Sepurnu. The Sepurnu is in the lower left. And here the plot thickens a little bit. Vayetze, on the lower left, Vayetze Yitzchok lasuach, says the Sepurnu. Noto min haderech. Yitzchok is on a road. Why is he on a road? He went to get a wife for his father, Hagar, and he's on the main route. And it's evening, the sun is about to set, he wants to daven. So he walks off the road. He steps away from the regular roads. He can find a quiet place to daven, and no one is going to disturb him. Al das lishpech siche, in order to daven. Lifnei Hashem basada, before God in the field. In other words, shalai yafsiku evnei drachim, the people shouldn't disturb him. Afal pi shekfar hispalel beve'el lacharei, though he already davened in the city, but now it's evening. He wants to daven again. V'kedem shehispalel ne'anim. And before he finishes davening, his answer comes to him. He encounters Rivka. So the Sepurnu is combining two of the three interpretations together, right? We have 3 or 4 different interpretations. Rashi says to daven. The Rashbam says to do farming. Others say to chapashmuz, to walk around amongst the trees and catch some fresh air, some cooler air. Some say to talk to his friends. The Sipurna says he was on a road. He went off the main road in order to daven amongst the trees. So that includes at least two of the interpretations. But the Sipurna adds that before he has a chance to daven, he sees Rivka. Which means to say that according to Sipurna, what was it? That he was looking out. What was he davening for? He was davening for a wife. And before he can even successfully daven, lo and behold, there she is. There's his wife. Now on page 4, you have a Rambam. Page 4 is really not a Rambam. Yeah, I'll read it. It's the Avram ben Rambam. It's the son of the Rambam. But the Avram ben Rambam writes that this Pirush he heard from his father. His father told it to him, but his father did not have a chance to write it down. He did. It's the Rambam is quite similar to Sipurna. I don't know if it's necessary for us to read, but why not? Vayetze Yitzchok miteir darkei bein makom meishave v'habe'er. He was on a road between where he lives and a well. Okay, he gia al makom. He came to a place shenes akev sham, where he stopped. Lefnei shkias hachama, before the sun was set, k'dei lull him to sleep. He's traveling from Be'er Lacherai to Hebron. I don't know where Be'er Lacherai is, but it's a distance. The sun goes down. So as the boys learn in the beginning of Masechta Pesachim, you shouldn't travel after dark. In those days, that was a very, very, very good idea. So the sun is setting, so he finds himself a hotel. The Yitzchok Be'er Lacherai means he finds himself a hotel. After he found the hotel and he put on his belongings, he left the hotel to go and daven. Shuv Yatza, 3 lines from the top. Min hamakim el karav lamakim alein, near his hotel, kadei lehishalach, to walk, v'lav v'desavaya b'sada, to serve Hashem in the field, becheftzei, in his desire, b'hizboidedus, in solitude, in aloneness, kedarkei, as was Yitzchok's custom, and of course, v'derech v'vi Hashem, that's how prophets pray. We need a lot of noise in order to daven, right? Tzaddikim need a lot of quiescence, quiet in order to daven. Or perhaps maybe it was already home. Maybe, we don't know, says the Rambam. But when it came afternoon, he left his home. He went back out into the field. He wanted to be alone. And he went to daven. And I would again propose that the Rambam, like this Sipurna, is in effect combining at least 2 of the interpretations. That he went to daven, but he went to daven take a lasuach amongst the sichim, amongst the trees, amongst the plants, amongst the shrubs, where there are no people. Now let's jump ahead. I want to go all the way until page 8. Page 8 is the Klei Yakar. And to be sure, the Klei Yakar doesn't have that much to add to what we read, but the Klei Yakar is quite elaborate. So therefore, I'm figuring it's a good idea for us to read the Klei Yakar now, because it's nice to read something that's all spelled out. So if you're on page 8, did I say page 8? Page 8, yes. Vayetzi Yitzchok seich basudi went out to the field, zog the Klei Yakar. Rabbi Seinu Zalam the Bekan, the Gemara learns from here that Yitzchok tiken tfilas mincha. Yitzchok enacted the mincha prayer, shul lefneis erev, as the sun is setting, samach lahadav shemesh, near the sunset. This is a support what the Gemara says. Be careful about mincha. Mincha is a good prayer. We daven 3 times a day. Take special care to daven mincha. Why? Eliyahu davened, and in mincha time the Eibishter answered him. In other words, mincha is a good time to pray. Now, the simple reason the Gemara says is because mincha is the prayer you are most likely to skip. Davening is before you go to work. Ma'ariv is before you go to sleep. Mincha is in the middle of your day. So the Gemara says mincha. But the Klei Yakar says no, there's more to it. You should be particular about mincha because Eliyahu was answered mincha time. And we read on. Though Avram was masakin shachris and Yankov masakin avis, we don't find that Avram davened and his prayer was answered so spontaneously. In the prayer of Mincha, Matzinu she Yitzchok nenemiyan. As soon as Yitzchok davened, he answered. Ki mistama. The kliyaka is mistama. Probably, what was he davening for? Akala. What else? What's more important? Yeah. His follow Yitzchok alazivim. Mistama. That's what he was davening for. Because the Yosef Eliezer baderech. He knew that Eliezer, or as the Chumash calls him, Eved Avraham, went to find him a wife. And he understands that the stakes are high. This is the basis for his offspring, for the future of Klal Yisrael. So mistama, he davened for a wife. And lo and behold, there she is. Ki alzeh yispalik kol chassid le'eis mitzay, says the Gemara zu isha. What should a chassid daven for at every opportunity? For a wife. It's the Gemara Masechta Brachos. Now, why is he davening in the field? And I want you to know that a lot of the Mefarshim get really, really upset. How could Yitzchok daven in the field? You're not supposed to daven in the field. You're supposed to daven in a closed-in area, because in a bikon, in an open space, your mind could wander. And there's all different kinds of explanations, that it wasn't exactly open, there was really a forest of trees, or what have you. You're not supposed to daven in an open field, because it offsets kavanah. You're supposed to daven near a tree, for example. Don't daven in an open space. Although Yitzchok's not exactly the average person. But why is he davening in a field? Because a wife is the same principle. You can have children, have offspring, and have fruit. Yitzchok is going to give him a field. Yitzchok, in his agriculture, in his farming, was so blessed. If he plants seeds and he produces 100 times the normal crop, if the Eibishter blesses his fruit and plants, how much more so he'll give him a wife that will produce the best fruit, that will have good offspring, good trees. So he goes out into the field to daven, because the field is the place of his great blessing from the Eibishter in agriculture. And he's thinking, if the Eibishter has blessed him so in agriculture, how much more so the Eibishter is going to bless him in finding a wife. And that's the symbol, that's the significance of him davening out in the field. So now the loose ends tie together better, right? How many interpretations did we have of a Yitzchok lasuach basada? Number 1, to daven. Number 2, to take a stroll. Number 3, to chap hashmuz. And number 4, to plant trees. So the chapping hashmuz, I don't know what to do with at the moment. To shoot the breeze, I don't know. But this kliyakar incorporates 3 of the ideas of the Rishonim. He went to daven in a field, not in a city. And the reason he went to daven in the field is because this is where agriculture is. Yitzchok's bracha that he already received was a blessing of agriculture. And he figures, he presumes, he supposes that the blessing of a wife will be also very generous, as was or is the blessing of agriculture. So it's true also that he went out into the field to see, maybe he didn't actually go plant a tree that night, but it was symbolically planting trees. Because what he was davening for was a wife, and he saw the trees as a symbol of the Eibishter's bracha in the area of being fruitful. The moment he davens, the Torah tells us, behold, the camels are coming. Certainly when Yitzchok davened, his eyes were down. As soon as he finishes the daven, he raises his head, he saw, behold, here is the answer. So the reasons all fit together like a jigsaw puzzle. Yitzchok went to daven for a wife in a field because he figured that that's a good place, so to speak, to replicate his anticipated bracha that his wife would bring him. Umizeh lamdu. This teaches us the best time for a person to be answered there is during mincha prayer. But listen to the reason. The reason is judgment is at night. Val Cain, says the Kliyaka, therefore Tfilas Arves hasmucha l'layla. Arves is closer tonight. V'chein Tfilas Shachas gamkin smucha l'layla shava. The morning is close to the previous night, but Mincha is in the middle. Al Cain ain bet feels ushum kitrin. Mincha is not close to yesterday's night, not close to tonight's night. It's a perfect time to pray. And I want you to know this Kliyaka is diametrically opposite to what it says in Kabbalah, as I'm going to show you in 1 minute. So the Kli Yakar says this is the best time to daven because it's the sweetest time of the day. It's the farthest away from either night, the night that's past or the night that's come. Now on page 9, I copied a letter from the Rebbe, which Bashkocha Pratas we learned recently in our Igros Kodesh class, where somebody asks the Rebbe about Mincha. Rabbi Avraham Hechel asked the Rebbe a question about Mincha. And the question he asked about Mincha is that the Gemara says Mincha is a special time. What's the proof that Mincha is a special time? Eliyahu Navi was answered Tfilas HaMincha. Correct? That makes Mincha a special time. But the Zohar says that Mincha is a time of judgment. So which is it? Is Mincha a time of judgment, or is Mincha a special time? You know what the answer is? Mincha is a time of judgment. But when you daven, you make it sweet. And when you make it sweet, you make it very sweet. Let's read what the Rebbe says. Meine. Muvas kushes, page 9 on the right at the bottom. Muvas kushezu bedach. The question you just asked me, is Mincha a good time, as indicated from the Gemara that Al Yohanavu was answered Mincha time? Or is Mincha a difficult time, as indicated from the Zohar that says it's the Shas Dinim? B'tzirif oid kasha. There's a second question associated with it. Mimai min Azal, the Gemara says, Gimel shoyis reviyat HaKadosh Baruch Hu yishuv ha'mesachek b'Lev Yossi. The last 3 hours, they wish to play with the Lev Yossi. And Lev Yossi happens to be Gevura for those who don't. Lev Yossi, the same age as Levi is Gevura. Don't worry about it. The Kaitef Atiratu, and the answer is as follows: Eis Mincha, Eis Din, exactly the opposite of the Kli Yakar. Mincha, the time of judgment. However, listen to this chap. The chap is very simple. If you daven in a time of Chesed, so Chesed could be all in your favor, right? But judgment could say, "Excuse me, I don't like this idea." If you daven in a time of Din, and you get Din to agree with the bracha, who's going to oppose it? Nobody, right? It's like the Democrat declaring war. There's nobody to stop him. You understand? He says like this: when you daven in Mincha time, you were victorious in the heavenly court. In the times of Gevura, says the Rebbe, you have great effects. There's no enemy. If you daven in a time of Dinim, and you get that the time of Dinim should agree to your bakasha, who's going to stop it? Mash'enkel, but also b'shachris, top of the next page. When you daven shachris, kishamidas chesed shelatas, chesed is the dominant force. Yifal oz b'tfilas, you'll be very effective. Aval ein ze adayin is hapcha. You're not transforming negative into positive. V'lachein kishi tavei mitzvah din b'tuk when judgment comes. Kishi not to tzali ere the sun is setting. F shesh atucha lim tekiti chadash. In the morning, chesed got you what you wanted. In the afternoon, din ruins it. But if din agrees to chesed, if din agrees to bracha, who is there to oppose it? And therefore, in the times of Eliyahu, the Jews were in a terrible place because they were being hypocrites, because they were on both sides of the fence. The only way to find favor for the Jewish people at that time was to transform judgment. He had no time to daven except in time of Mincha. And again, I'm not going to read the rest of it, but the spirit of it is Mincha, the time of Dinim. But when you sweeten the Dinim of Mincha, it's sweeter than the sweetness of the time of Chesed. The Kli Yakar says something very different, but this is the classic understanding of Pipnimius Atera Pikabol. So the point is, Yitzchok goes to daven dafka in the evening because it's the time of Dinim. What's he davening for? A wife. He's therefore, quote, symbolically, end quote, davening in a field, and behold, there she is. Okay?
Yeah, so the tefillah is mamtik the dinim.
The tefillah at that time is mamtik the dinim, correct.
So what in the tefillah mamtik the dinim?
The bakasha, you're asking the Eibush, the tchina, you ask Hashem, he gives you? Yeah. Playing. Toy, the Eibush plays.
What do you mean?
He's playing with the Legas. Don't ask me, Pshat. That's, what am I supposed to do? Now we have a Ralbag. The Ralbag is on page 6. Now this Ralbag, to be sure, is not specific to this pasuk. And I want you to know that the Abarbanel almost quotes the Ralbag verbatim. The whole page, and it's he says a whole bunch of stuff, and then he says, oh, by the way, the Ralbag says this also. The Ralbag is before the Abarbanel. This is Chakir, this is real philosophy. And this Ralbag, I'm not going to read it all because I don't have time, and it's also, it's not so much connected to this pasuk. As I was preparing today's class, I made a whole file if I ever want to give a class on Shachas Mincha Ma'ariv. What the Ralbag observes is, why do we daven in the morning and at night, in the evening and at night? And he explains it in the framework of Chachmas HaChakir. There's a lot of subtlety here, there's a lot of controversy, big controversy, but don't worry about it. The Ralbag's basic argument is that they daven when the forces of nature are making major changes. In the morning the sun comes up, in the evening the sun is setting, and at night the stars emerge. And to use ancient form, people worshipped the sun. The Ralbag writes, and so does the Abarbanel, if there's anything in the universe most reasonable for people to worship, it's the sun. I mean, there's no question about it. I mean, we understand that now better than we ever did, because the sun literally provides us with everything important. Without the sun, there's nothing. So it's very logical people to worship the sun. So Avraham made a tefillah right in the morning when the sun comes up and says, remember, the sun has a master. The sun is not the God is the Rebbe Shteraleh. Then Yitzchok daven when the sun is getting weak, when the sun is about to set. To demonstrate, you see, you're worshipping the sun. If the sun is so powerful, why is he getting weak and why is he about to disappear? And Yankov davens at night when the stars are out, because the most obvious characteristic of the stars is that there are many of them. And he uses a very, very interesting line. Let me just show you this line. See if you can find it. I made an A on your margin. On page 6. One line after the A. Let's read from the A. The proof that the stars are not God, that there are many of them. It's impossible for the universe to be made whole for many gods. If the universe functions in harmony, if the universe functions in a unit, in an achdus, and last time I checked, the universe has an incredible harmony. It's impossible to have many gods and a harmony. If there was combative, if you saw stars crashing into each other, and galaxies collapsing on top of one another, black holes sweeping everything away, then maybe, yeah. But this incredible harmony. He says, when you see so many stars, and you see harmony, there has to be one harmonizer. The way I understand these words is, when you have one governance over many things. In other words, when you have peace amongst, you know how many stars there are? Billions of billions. They say that there's billions of galaxies, and every galaxy has billions of stars. It's staggering. Our imagination cannot fathom. And the sun is Sachakal, one star in the Milky Way. The number of stars that exist are imamish, virtually ein mispah. And they all get along. There's got to be one overseer. And he goes on to say other points I'm not going to get into. But the bottom line is that the tefillahs were designed at those times that people are most likely to turn towards nature. And the Avais HaOlam are saying, no, go past it. Because nature is not sufficient. Avraham did it in the morning when the sun comes up for the reasons that he brings here. Yitzchok does, the sun is going on. He said, look, the sun is waning, the sun is getting weaker. That's not God. And Yankov Avinu at night, because there are so many stars and there's so much harmony, there's got to be one who harmonizes, brings order into all of it, that's outside of the entire system. That's essentially what the Ralbag says. It's a very, very interesting page, but that's as much as we're going to learn. So Vayetze Yitzchok lasuach basada, according to the Ralbag, means he goes out into the field to daven at a time that davening is useful, to use words to connect the koiches hateva with the Eibishter. We've talked about this innumerable times. We've had Shuram and Karbanos. I always tell you, the whole point of many mitzvahs in the Torah is that in those areas where Eiv de Avodah Zarah separate forces from the Eibishter, the Mamini Ha'achdus, the monotheists, create a worship and a prayer whose entire message is, you must unify the supposedly diverse and divergent forces with the Shem Elokeinu and the Shem Echad. And that's the spirit of prayer at these particular times, as it's explained by the Ralbag. And like I told you before, more or less, Abarbanel quotes him. Okay? This is more or less the end of the more basic interpretations. In other words, everything we learned until now, for the most part, is cut of the pshat. Okay? The one thing that we're all wondering about is what's the point of Yitzchok going out into the field to talk to his friends? We can explain why he goes out into the field to daven. We can explain how the davening is connected to Rivka. We can explain how the davening in the field is connected indirectly to agriculture because it's connected to reproduction, v'chuli. But what's the purpose of Yitzchok go out in the field to stam have a shmooze with his buddies? What kind of value and use is there in that? And let's say at the moment that we have no idea. Okay? From now, we're going to learn deeper interpretations. Really Kabbalah. Really, for the most part, we're going to learn interpretations that are more Kabbalistic. And we begin with the Zohar. The Zohar is on page 3. Lasuach ba'asada lifnois erev. To talk in the field in the evening, says the Zohar. The Zohar agrees with those commentaries who say that Yitzchok had already come home. Yitzchok went to Be'el Acharet to get a wife for his father, and he already came home. He was back in Hebron. And he went back out into the field to daven, as the Sipurnu said and the Rambam said. But he adds something else. Did Yitzchok have no other place to pray, no house, or other more protected, isolated area to pray other than the field? Ella, the answer is as follows. The field in which Yitzchok davened was that field that Shakon Avram Samach L'Ma'arav V'chol. This was the field next to the Ma'aras HaMachpelah. It wasn't the Ma'aras HaMachpelah proper. But we know that when Yitzchok bought, Avram bought the Ma'aras HaMachpelah, he bought it with a field. And Yitzchok went out into this field, says the Zayar, B'shaita dehava Yitzchok ol gabei. Yitzchok walks by this field. Chama, he sees Shchinta alei, the Shechina is there. V'salek reichen iloyin kadish. And holy, supernal odors were emerging from there. Or begin kach, and because of this reason, have a matzlat haman, he davened there. V'kaboy litzlaisa, he chose to pray over there. I gave a class years ago, and I think it's on the web, if you go Chayesara, on Ma'aras HaMachpelah. I have a class on Ma'aras HaMachpelah. And that class is based on the first Maimon Teireh Chayesara, Yigala Lon Taimei. And basically, what I learned with the people who were at that class, it was actually a male audience, was that Ma'aras HaMachpelah is the intermediate between the world and Gan Eden. It's a beautiful hezbollah. Here the Zohar says that Yitzchok goes out into this field, and in effect he sees the lights from Gan Eden emerging. In other words, he sees the presence of the Shekhinah. Says, Yitzchok, this is a good place to pray. If I may, if you don't mind, we all know that we have a concept of a Beis HaMikdash. Agreed? Everybody knows the concept of a Beis HaMikdash. We also know that the concept of a Beis HaMikdash is based on two principles. Number one, you build a Eibush to the house. And number two, what's number two? Anybody? Hello? You build the Eibush to the house, and number two, he moves in. He lives there. Like you read in Chumash and Pashas Shmini, they built a house, they davened, and the Shekhinah came fartik. And the two are interconnected. The fancy words are Merkava or Kruvim. You build a place, Eibishter, a spot which is designed properly and is properly purified, then holy, the Eibishter will rest. Usually the program is, first you build a house and the Eibishter moves in. Yitzchok goes out into the field. No one built him any houses, there's no Kruvim, but the Shekhinah is there anyway. Trachter, okay, we didn't build him a Beis HaMikdash. The Shekhinah is present without us building him a house. The famous Rambam, the very, very famous Rambam. But the Rambam writes that even though when the Beis HaMikdash, when the Beis Sheni was, Beis Rishon was destroyed, and Yibon into Ghost, Kedusha Rishayna was Nisbatla, the original holiness that Yidden gave Eretz Yisrael was abolished. But the Kedusha of the Beis HaMikdash never went away. Why? Shechina loy bottle. It says a Rambam, not Chassid, it's a Rambam. The Shechina never stops. In other words, you destroyed the building. But once the Eibishter moved into the house is gone. He still lives there. Where's he going to live? He's there. He's there. Yeah, building, no building, he's there. So Yitzchak was out into the field, sees the Shechina. There's no house of prayer. But the whole point of the house of prayer is the Shechina should rest. The Shechina is here. I'm davening right here. What about the fact that he's davening in the field? I guess he decided when the Shechina is present, it's okay to daven in the field. So Vayetze Yitzchak lasuach basada, the primary word in that phrase is basada, in the field. You're not supposed to daven in the field. But because he finds the Shechina there, he daven. This is the Zohar. Now turn to page 5, and we're going to do the Rabbeinu B'chaya. V'al derech HaKabbalah. In your print, it's 4 lines from the bottom. I actually cut and pasted, which is why the page looks a little bit funny, because I wanted to save paper. Page 5. 4 lines from the bottom, right here. V'al derech HaKabbalah, right there. According to Kabbalah, what did the Zohar say? Yitzchok comes into the field and he finds the Shechina. He finds the Shechina. Okay, the Shechina is here, I'm going to daven. But the Rabbeinu B'chai takes it to another level. Listen to this. Lashon lasuach basada. Lasuach means to speak. Basada means in the field. So he translates like this. Ha-mispala l'shem ha-miyuchad. When one davens to the Eibishter's primary name, that's when he davens to Hashem, what we call Havaya, but who maskir hakinui. You don't say Hashem's name. What do we say? What does the Gemara say? Hashem's name is written Yud Kei Vav Kei. How is it pronounced? Aleph Dalet Nun Yud. Right? According to Kabbalah, what does that mean? There's a higher level of godness which is called HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Kutcha Brichu. There's a lower level of godness which is called Shechina. The higher level of godness which is called HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Havaya, Yud Kei Vav Kei. The lower level of godness Shechina is Adnai. So even though we're really davening to Havaya, we say Adnai. The word Sadeh, field, is one of the many, 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 many words that denote Shechina, Malchus HaTzilut. Vayetze Yitzchak lasuach basada, which means he went to daven to Havaya through the garment of basada. U'metayich hakinoi meitzei. He's relating to the Eibishter through a nickname, namely Sadeh, but through the Sadeh he's connected to the Eibishter. In other words, the Rabbeinu B'chai is a very simple question. Who cares where Yitzchok went to daven? He went to daven. It should simply say Vayetze Yitzchok lasuach. He went to daven. Why did it say lasuach basada? So the Rabbeinu B'chai is explaining al derech HaKabbalah. He went to daven, but he chose to daven basada. Basada means that even though he's davening to the Eibishter himself, but he's davening to the Eibishter, as we call it, through the Sfira, to say the Shtalshalos, like the famous Hayem Yem, the middle Rebbe, the Marash said, "Medavtake wissen the Drochams the Eilmas Hayenim." If you want to daven and you want to be heard, you have to know the roots. You have to know Shtalshalos. So Yitzchok knows Shtalshalos. So lasuach basada. He's talking to the Eibishter through the roots, or through the ladder, if you will, which brings the prayers upwards, and that's why it says basada. So Sada goes on Malchus, on Shechina, and Yitzchok is davening to Havaya through Shechina. And he brings the other example from Vayifka B'Mokim. Now read at the end of the line, 3 lines at the bottom. All of what Hashem gives us happens through Malchus. However, which means, even though everything that the world gets, it gets from Shechina, from the lower Madrega Velakus, but really it's coming from Shem Havaya. Like Havaya and Elokim, all the koyach the world gets, it gets from Shem Havaya. Elokim is the screen. So if you wanted to, so to speak, peel away a layer of this Rabbeinu B'chai, you could say that the Rabbeinu B'chai is enhancing the Zohar. The Zohar says Yitzchok goes out into a field and he sees Shechina, and the Rabbeinu B'chai says he sees the Shechina, but through the Shechina he's mispalo to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is higher than Shechina. Shechina is the level of godliness. What does Shechina mean? Al Shem Sheshechenes Mislabeshes, that it descends. He's out in the field, there's no Beis HaMikdash, but the Shechina is present. Vayetze Yitzchak lasuach basada means that through the Shechina, Yitzchak is connecting not just to Shem Elokim, to Shem Adnai, but it's connected to Shem Havaya as well. So this Rabbeinu B'chai is taking the Zohar and enhancing it, if I'm not wrong. And I may very, very well be wrong. Believe me. You better believe. Now, this is a Livnus HaSapir. Livnus HaSapir is one of the oldest Kabbalah Sfarim. I've had this book on my shelf, and every week I look at it, and every week I lose my courage, because it's Aramaic, and it's very difficult. It's I think a Talmud or a son of Rabbi Yehuda HaChosid. who wrote the Sefer Chassidim. This is way before the Zohar was discovered. You're talking now 900 years ago. It's one of the oldest Kabbalah Slam. I have a Sefer. Every week when I prepare a Parsha class, I open it up, I look at it, I copy the pages, I start reading, I lose my nerve, and I put it away. so we're doing page 7. We're doing the Livnas HaSapir, although the direction of this class, so to speak, is not consistent. This Livnas HaSapir is off to the side a little bit. It's just a pirush of an ancient Kabbalah Sefer. Okay? This part of the page that's decorated, okay, that's scribbled. He went out into the field to Daven, translates the Livnas HaSapir. It's Sada Shaverachai Hashem. This is the field that God blessed, which means basically to Gan Eden. And the lashon of Yitzchok's prayer is lasuach. What does lasuach mean? To talk to Hashem. Utamiyah says Livnas HaSapir. I have a question. Ki Beis Mem Hey. What does Beis Mem Hey stand for? B'Medrash HaZohar. He doesn't even call it Zohar. It's Medrash HaZohar. That's how old this is. In the Medrash HaZohar Parsha Zu, Pirush Mashakosov, David HaMelech says, Erev v'voiker v'tzarayim. At night, in the morning and the evening, Asicha I daven. V'eheme. V'eheme means I cry out. Or v'eheme sometimes is translated, I question. I looked in the Mefarshim under v'eheme, and I didn't find a lot of help. I really looked. I didn't want to come here and not know the Hebrew translation, because I look like a fool. But guess what? I looked and I still look like a fool. Because the Mefarshim, the translation that I saw was v'eheme is Lashon Tmiyah. I wonder. But I believe that also has a connotation of
whining.
Right, of whining, of complaining.
Yeah, right.
One thing is for sure, v'eheme is a stronger lashon than asicha. Okay? And then it says in the Zohar as follows: Afagav the itket lasazimne. Even though David HaMelech mentions 3 times, Lai Avid El Terein. You're supposed to daven 3 times a day. David davens twice, because it says Erev Aveke V'Tzarayim, and then it only says 2 words: Asicha I speak, V'eheme and I complain, or I wonder. Okay. The Ksiv, as the pasuk says, Asicha V'eheme. Ba'Beker the Chesed, the morning, which is the time of Chesed. Sagi Ba Sicha, the morning is the time of kindness. So all he has to do is speak. And Ba'erev the Din Natalia, the evening, the time of judgment. Ba'Eva'eheme. So the Zohar says that in the morning you can talk to God. In the evening you got to complain. What word connotes speaking? Sicha. What word connotes complaining? Eheme. When is Yitzchok davening? In the afternoon. And he's only talking. It's afternoon and it says it's lasuach basal. Alma be'erev sagi b'siach. It's enough even in the evening just to talk to Hashem. You don't have to complain. And he ends up push the teretz. V'nira be'ein teretz is the shiny avani line. Our holy fathers are different. The achidan le'ela, because they're so connected to the Eibush, they're sagi lahu. It's enough for them that afilu b'shaita the darga kashishil. Even in an hour when a step of hardness, of severity rules b'sicha, all they have to do is talk to the Eibush that does akoin in their meritus. But we, David, the boy tshuva, David needs to do tshuva. So what is the Livnas HaSapir saying? That if Yitzchok is davening in the afternoon, the wrong word to connote tefillah for that time is sicha. Because the connotation of the word sicha is you're conversing with the Eibishter without haftzara. You're not insisting, you're not protesting, you're not crying out. Says he that the time of Mincha the Zohar says you have to cry out. And the Teretz says you have to cry and I have to cry. Yitzchok doesn't have to cry. It's a time of dinim and Yitzchok sweetens the dinim with sicha alone. This is Livnas HaSapir. Nice to read a different sefer that you never met before. Now we go to page 10 and we learn the Teda Age. And I'll let you in on a secret in my Lakota Teda class that appears every Tuesday night on theyeshiva.net. You know that 8:30 on Tuesday nights they have a Lakota Teda class, Teda Age. It's video. Theyeshiva.net. On Tuesday they put up my Teda Age class. The Yeshiva, THEYESHIVA, theyeshiva.net, 8:30 on Tuesday nights, as far as I know. This is the mimer that I taught, so you're getting a little bit of a heads up.
What time?
8:30. I think it's Thursday. Tuesday. The Chatchila was Wednesday, they changed it to Tuesday. So you have a little bit of a head start. But tonight I'm going to teach you a little bit of a different focus. But before we get to the Torah, let's summarize, let's recapitulate. We started off with a bunch of pshat insights into the Yitzchok lasuach basada. To daven, to do agriculture, to take a stroll, to talk to his friends. And we sort of tied them together. How? We tied them together by presuming that Yitzchok is davening for Rivka. The moment you explain that Yitzchok is davening for Rivka, 3 of those 4 fit right in. He's davening in the field because the field is reminiscent of his success at agriculture, at reproduction in plants. And he's anticipating that if you give him a wife, he's going to have good frucht. I'll just tell you a story. I'll tell my man Amuzgir. The Rebbe's in Shtei Nesara, the Rebbe Rashab's wife, the Rebbe Rashab's birthday is this week, Chot Marchesh, in a couple of days, was very short. Her name was Rebbe Shtei Nesara. And she came from a Polish family. She was a daughter of Rabbi Yossi Paltiel, but her grandfather was her family were Polish, not Lubavitch, Chabad. Her father was a Rebbe, a big tzaddik. She married the Rebbe Rashab, who was her first cousin. And she was away from home. It was very difficult for her. From the time she was literally 14 or 15, she was away from home. And to make things worse, she never didn't get pregnant right away. The Frierdiker wasn't born until about 5 years after their wedding. And she ate her heart out. There's a whole story that I read recently about a dream she had and the year that Frierdiker was born. It was very hard for her. For whatever reason, she was very, very, very self-conscious about her height. Because everybody in the Rebbe's house was very tall, and she was very little, a klinchike. And she was young, and she was aware of her appearance, and it bothered her. Her father-in-law, the Rebbe Marash, saw her once, and he sensed her self-consciousness. So he tells her, "Sorg sich nicht. Kurze Beine geben gute Frucht." He says, "Don't feel bad. The short trees produce the sweetest fruit." Kurze Beine geben gute Frucht. And she was the mother of the Frierdiker Rebbe. Kurze Beine geben gute Frucht. So the Yitzchok goes out into the field in anticipation as the Beime soll geben gute Frucht. So we incorporate into this commentary 3 of the 4 pshat. A field, agriculture, to daven, and a stroll in the field. The one that we sort of find useless is, what's this business of going to talk to his friends? What kind of significance could that possibly have? The Kabbalah that we had, the Zohar is, he meets the Shechina. The Rabbeinu Bechaya adds that through the Shechina he meets Kodesh Bricha, which is even a higher aspect. Through the Sada, and so forth. And then we had the Livnas Asapir, fine. Now we're going to learn about Rebbe Teireh. And because of time restraints, or constraints, the regular problem, and also because of the way this Maimed is written, and the way I'm choosing to teach it to you, the best way for me to teach this to you is by giving you an introduction. Okay? If I was playing with you word association, yeah, and there's no context, and I said to you as a Lubavitcher Chassid, Sadeh, what would be your reaction? Huh? Sadeh, field, what would be your reaction? The king in the field. No? If I told you Sadeh, what would be your reaction? Melech Basadeh, of course. Hello, show solve, problem solved. Right. That's how the Alter Rebbe explains the word Sadeh. This Maimed has nothing to do with Melech Basadeh, but has to do with the principle. Because according to Torah, Pnimiyas HaTorah, a city, represents an environment which is concentrated, sophisticated, and elevated. Who lives in a city? Important people, or self-important people. Yeah. Pnimiyas HaTorah represents Neshamas in Gan Eden, people who are tzaddikim, close to the Eibishter. It's an ideal place. It's a spiritual place. It's a holy place. The desert is a place of sinners. As I said in the Kuta Teira, the desert is a sinner. The Eibishter, the king goes to the field, but he doesn't go to the desert. And if you ever learned the Kuta Teira, you know that means that those of us have to do tshuva. The king in the field doesn't reach us in the desert. We have to come from the desert into the field to meet the king. What's the field? The field is a place where simple people live. They haven't done any Avedas, but they're simple people. The irony is that these simple people, in their simple ways, are providing the entire society with its most fundamental need, and that is food, bread. And the Alter Rebbe translates, Vayetze Yitzchok lasuach. Yitzchok went to bend, not to daven, to bend down, basade in the field. And he interprets. The Maimer the Alter Rebbe speaks about Teirah Shabal Peh, Braisis and Mishnah, don't worry about it. But he says Yitzchok went out to lower himself from his madrega to be involved in Avedas Habirurim, to elevate sparks. Lifnois Erev, he translates, Lefanois Erev, to change the night into day. Vayetze Yitzchok lasuach. Yitzchok goes out of his holy level, lasuach, to bend down, to lower himself. Basade, in the field, Lefanes, to transform Erev, the night, into the day. Why? Because since Yitzchok's midah is gvura, and ain't had dinim nimtokin ela b'sharshan, you want to sweeten judgment, you have to use judgment itself. So Yitzchok, who's the holiest of the three of us, yeah? Again, if I played a word association, and I said to you Avraham, what would you think of? Kindness, of course, right? If you wouldn't, don't say it because you don't want to ruin my image. Okay? If I said Yankee, what would you say? Sadis. If I said Yitzchok, what would you say? Holy. Demis, I think that I know that I'm putting words in your mouth, but I don't think that what I just told you was that much of a brainwashing. When you think of Avraham, you think of Chesed. When you think of Yankee, you think of Tzaras Tzrudis. We think of Yitzchok, you have an Eila Tmima, a man who basically lived in Gan Eden. A holy man. He was blind for much of his life. He was involved in spiritual stuff. Vayetze Yitzchok, this holiest of the others, goes out lasuach, he lowers himself, he bends in the field, lefanes erev, to transform darkness into light. To be Isaac and Avedas Habirurim. Why Yitzchok? Because Yitzchok's Indian is Gevurah. I'm sorry. Not uncivilized, simple. Uncivilized is the desert. The desert. Sin is midbar. Sada is not Avedas, but it's called Bar. It's outside. It's lower. Now, Rabbi Yossi, I want to show you about Ditchever. Page 11. I want you to know something. When I prepared this class, I didn't have the Ditchever in my sites. But when I decided to read the Rebbe's Igis on page 9, the Rebbe is assigned to the Ditchever. And the Ditchever is something very, very interesting, which gives depth to the Ramban that we had on page 1. What did the Ramban say? Yitzchok went to Chapa Shmus with his friend. I think the Ramban. The Badicheve says something very, very interesting. Right here, the boy say here, at the bottom of the right side of page 11, the page is bent. You could see that every line is sort of staggered a bit. In the name of the Mezritcher Maggid I heard. Now notice how what we're about to read is exactly what the Alter Rebbe says. The Badicher has a whole bunch of pshatim on this pasuk, but the pshat that he brings in the name of his Rebbe, the Maggid, is the same. Page 11 is the same pshat that the Alter Rebbe says on the right side at the bottom. HaPirush, second line from the bottom. Ki Adam, a person, asher hu medaber dvorim afilum the Adam. He's having a shmooze. He's having an idle chat, a simple conversation with people. However, v'choyshev machshavas kedeshes v'teich hadiburim, he's having a shmooze. A fabringt. Goes out into the field, talk about the weather. Isn't it a beautiful sunset? Isn't it a nice day? Isn't it nice and cool? And the breeze is terrific. But he's having holy thoughts, top of the second column. He's elevating sparks. And that's the meaning of Ayetze Yitzchok. He translates Yitzchok Malashon Simcha lasuach, to have an idle conversation. Basada in the field, that through this is Mavad Netzutzes. Now, it's a pshetel. This Badichevet is a pshetel. But when you compound this by Ditchva with Alter Rebbe, that explains what is the meaning of Vayetz Yitzchok lasuach. Yitzchok is bending down, he's going away from his madrege to involve himself in the Sadeh. Lefanes Erev, to transform darkness into light. And compounded by a Ramban. Ramban is a Rish. Ramban is a Makubal. Ramban is Ish Elikim. He says he went out in the field to have a chat. Now why is that important? So we had a chat, big deal. Right? Vayetze, look back at page 1. Vayetze lifneis erev lasuach v'sada imreya v'eya v'shasho. Chap mashmuas. You all of a sudden discover how careful you have to be when you read that Ramban. Yitzchak went to have a conversation. Dr. Baditchev no, he went to be Mavada Birurim. He's talking to his friends, and they think he's talking about the sunset, but he's using words. And in his kavanas, he's miyachad yechudim, who knows what. He's elevating spot. So this final idea from the Baditchever, which is compounded in the Alter Rebbe, ties together all 4 pshat explanations of the pasuk. He went to Daven. He went out into a field. He went to check on agriculture. And he went to have a conversation. How do they all fit together? He went to Daven. First of all, on a pshat level, he went to Daven for a wife in a field, because the field is reminiscent of a blessing and reproduction. And checking on the trees means to say that it should be very, very fruitful. Kabbalah adds, Yitzchok didn't only go down into the field to find a wife that's going to give him his own personal offspring. This has to do with the more mystical concept of offspring. What is the more mystical concept of offspring? The sparks of godliness that we bring to the Eibishter. In other words, in addition to Vayetze Yitzchak lasuach basada being an allusion to Yitzchak going to Daven for a wife who's going to give him children, Vayetze Yitzchak lasuach basada also means he's going out into the field to get himself his spiritual children, which is the elevation of sparks, which is achieved even through what looks like a simple conversation. So you think about what we just learned, everything fits perfect. Alt stimmt. Your funny face is making me very nervous.
What does it mean? What conversation?
Verschiedene. He was davening, he was talking to his friends, he was checking on the field. All these pieces fit together. And what it says is Yitzchak went away from his madrege because the purpose of his going away from this madrege was to find the basis for peiros, for fruit, both biological fruit through Rivka, as well as more mystical fruit, so the Nitzutz Kedusha is going to elevate in the fruit. Okay, think about it. No, get a tracht. Think about it.